Picture this: a frozen Eastern Front night in 1942. German soldiers huddle in trenches, staring into a moonlit sky that looks empty, silent, safe. Then, someone hears it. A soft whooshing sound, like a broom sweeping across the air. The noise grows, then vanishes. Moments later, bombs slam into supply depots and sleeping barracks. Chaos erupts. Terrified, the Germans give the unseen attackers a name: Nachthexen, the Night Witches. But these witches weren't monsters. They were young women, many barely out of high school, flying flimsy, open-cockpit biplanes made of wood and canvas. No armor, no radios, sometimes no parachutes. Yet they flew up to 18 missions a night, in the dark, under fire. How did they become the most feared flyers on the Eastern Front? How do you turn obsolete training planes into weapons of psychological warfare? Stay with me as we unravel the incredible, almost unbelievable story of the Night Witches. In this video, we're diving deep into the story of the Soviet Union's all-female night bomber regiments, especially the legendary 588th, later redesignated the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment. These women flew over 23,000 sorties, dropped thousands of tons of bombs, and earned the undying hatred and fear of Nazi troops. We'll explore who these women were, how they were trained, the terrifying conditions they faced, and the ingenious tactics that made their tiny biplanes so deadly. We'll meet individual pilots and navigators, walk through a mission step by step, and confront the harsh reality of sexism they endured from their own side. If you're into untold World War II stories and hidden chapters of aviation history, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing and tapping the notification bell so you don't miss future deep dives like this, and try to watch through to the end, where we'll break down the key lessons the Night Witches still offer us today. To understand the Night Witches, we need to understand the woman who made them possible, Marina Raskova. Before the war, Raskova was a celebrity aviator in the Soviet Union, often called the Soviet Amelia Earhart. She held long-distance flight records, her face appeared in newspapers, and she became a symbol of female capability in the air. When Nazi Germany invaded in 1941, thousands of Soviet women wrote to the government, begging to fight as pilots, navigators, and mechanics. Most were rejected. The Red Army, like almost every army at the time, believed combat aviation was a man's job. Raskova used her fame and political connections to push back. She personally petitioned Stalin, arguing that women could fill critical gaps in the Air Force. In October 1941, she won. The Soviet Union authorized 3 all-female aviation regiments: 1 fighter, 1 day bomber, and 1 night bomber, the unit that would become the Night Witches. The women who answered Raskova's call were astonishingly young. Many were students pulled straight from universities and flying clubs, some still teenagers who had only flown gliders or light trainers. Others were teachers, factory workers, or clerks who traded their civilian lives for flight suits. Training was brutal and rushed. The Soviet Union was fighting for survival. There was no time for leisurely instruction. What would normally take years was crammed into months. Women learned navigation, night flying, formation tactics, emergency procedures, and how to maintain their own aircraft. On top of this, they had to prove themselves in a deeply skeptical environment. Male officers doubted they could handle stress, cold, or combat. Equipment issued to them was often ill-fitting: boots too big, uniforms designed for men, and flight gear not adapted to their needs. Yet, day after day, they kept flying, outworking many of their male counterparts just to be taken seriously. The aircraft they flew would have looked more at home on a farm than a battlefield. The Polikarpov Po-2 was a slow 2-seat biplane with a wooden frame and canvas skin. Originally designed for training and crop dusting, it cruised at around 100 kilometers per hour, so slow that in some cases, German fighters struggled to engage without stalling. It had almost no instrumentation, no radio, and little to no armor. In winter, the open cockpit meant sub-zero temperatures slicing through thin flight suits. The engines were loud and underpowered. From a modern perspective, it seems like a death sentence. But the very weaknesses of the Po-2 became its strengths. Its low speed and ability to fly at treetop level made it hard to hit with radar and anti-aircraft guns. Its wooden construction produced a tiny radar signature. It could take off and land from rough, improvised fields close to the front, perfect for night harassment bombing. The night witches turned their flimsy Po-2s into instruments of psychological warfare through clever tactics. Missions were usually flown in small groups. They would approach the target area with engines roaring, then, just outside the German lines, cut the throttle and glide. In the dead of night, the sudden silence was unnerving. The only remaining sound was the faint rustle of wind over canvas, the broom-like whoosh that inspired their nickname. At the last moment, they'd drop their bombs, restart the engine, and slip back into the darkness. Sometimes, 2 aircraft would divert German searchlights and anti-aircraft fire, while a third slipped in low to deliver bombs. They flew multiple sorties per night, often up to a dozen or more, keeping enemy troops awake, exhausted and on edge. Even when the physical damage was limited, the constant fear and sleep deprivation eroded German morale. Their first combat missions were anything but glamorous. Early in 1942, the 588th was deployed to the Southern Front. The women arrived to find crude airstrips, limited supplies, and skeptical male commanders who treated them as a curiosity. Initial missions focused on small-scale harassment, bombing supply dumps, rail junctions, and troop concentrations at night. The pilots had to navigate using simple compasses, stopwatches, and paper maps, often under cloud cover or in blizzards. Losing orientation meant potentially crashing into the ground or drifting over enemy territory. German anti-aircraft units soon adapted, filling the sky with flak. The first losses hit hard. These weren't anonymous names on a list. They were roommates, classmates, friends. Yet mission reports gradually changed skeptical attitudes. The women completed sorties in terrible weather where male units had refused to fly, and they kept hitting targets night after night. Respect, though grudging, began to grow. Life between missions was harsh and relentlessly exhausting. The night witches often operated from primitive forward airfields, just rough strips carved into fields or forests. They slept in drafty huts or dugouts, sometimes sharing beds in shifts. Hot food was rare. Warmth was a luxury. Because they flew at night, their schedules were inverted. Days were for planning, briefings, and trying to rest while artillery thundered and engines roared around them. Nights were for flight after flight, take off, bomb, land, refuel, rearm, repeat. They also served as their own ground crew. Women loaded bombs by hand, hauled fuel, patched up damage, and performed maintenance in freezing conditions. Mechanics worked with numb fingers and inadequate tools, cannibalizing parts from wrecked planes. Despite everything, camaraderie was strong. They decorated dugouts with flowers when possible, shared letters from home, and celebrated small victories, a successful mission, a clear night, a comrade's safe return from a close call. Every mission meant dancing on the edge of death. The Po-2's lack of armor made even small fragments lethal. German searchlights and flak batteries learned to anticipate the night witch's routes, turning sections of sky into lethal traps. The women developed techniques to survive: sudden dives, erratic course changes, flying painfully low over rivers and treetops. But not everyone made it back. Entire crews vanished in flames or into the dark, their wrecks never found. Beyond the physical danger, there was psychological strain. Many pilots flew until utter exhaustion, eyes burning, hands shaking on the controls. Some talked about a peculiar stillness during missions, fear turning into a kind of focused emptiness. Only after landing did the shaking begin. Yet they kept going, driven by patriotism, by loyalty to each other, and by rage at the invasion that had destroyed their homes and families. Their courage wasn't the absence of fear, but choosing to fly anyway. The Night Witches didn't just frustrate German commanders, they genuinely unnerved frontline soldiers. German troops spread rumors that these women had cat-like night vision, that they took special injections to enhance their senses, that they were witches in the literal, supernatural sense. Commanders reportedly offered an Iron Cross to any pilot who could shoot down a Po-2. Yet the aircraft's slow speed and low altitude made it surprisingly difficult for fast German fighters to intercept. Many attacks overshot or stalled. To the exhausted infantry trying to sleep under constant threat of nocturnal bombing, the Night Witches became a symbol of relentless Soviet pressure. Even if the bombs were small, the psychological effect was enormous. Troops dreaded the soft rustle in the sky that meant another sleepless night. Ironically, the Germans' own myth-making amplified the Night Witches' legend, turning underpowered biplanes into tools of terror and the young women flying them into near-mythic figures. Behind the legend are real individuals whose stories give the unit its human face. Take Nadezhda Popova, one of the most famous Night Witches. She flew 852 missions, was shot down multiple times, and once returned with her aircraft so riddled with holes it was a miracle it held together. Or Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the regiment's commanding officer, who shaped raw volunteers into a disciplined, elite night bomber unit. Under her leadership, 23 members of the regiment would be named Heroes of the Soviet Union, the country's highest honor. There were navigators like Tatiana Makarova, who calmly plotted courses through flak-filled skies, and mechanics who kept impossible aircraft flying. Many had lost families to the war, turning their grief into determination. These weren't cartoon superheroes. They laughed, argued, made mistakes, fell in love, and grieved. Their achievements become even more astonishing when we remember they were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Let's walk through a typical mission. It's late evening. The women gather in a cramped briefing room, cigarette smoke curling in the lamplight. The target, a German supply depot near the front. Distances, bearings, altitudes, and flak positions are scribbled onto maps. Navigators memorize key landmarks, rivers, roads, forest edges. Outside, ground crews load small bombs under the lower wings and in racks beneath the fuselage. The pilots climb into their open cockpits, adjust scarves and goggles, and signal for engine start. The Po-2's tiny engine coughs, then settles into a rough buzz. Takeoff feels sluggish under the bomb load. They climb slowly into the dark, spreading out into loose formations. Over enemy territory, engines cut to idle. The world shrinks to stars above, faint ground shapes below, and the whisper of air over fabric. At the drop point, the navigator gives the signal. Bombs fall. A heartbeat of silence, then distant blossoms of fire mark another strike. For all their heroism, the Night Witches fought a second battle, against sexism from their own side. At first, many male officers treated them as propaganda tools rather than serious combat aviators. They received hand-me-down equipment, older aircraft, and minimal logistical support. Some men were openly hostile, insisting women didn't belong at the front. Others were paternalistic, trying to shield them from danger, an impossible idea in total war. The women countered the only way they could, by outperforming expectations. They flew in weather others refused, completed mission quotas, and accepted the same risks. Even victory brought complications. After the war, many found their service quietly sidelined. Some struggled to find work in aviation. Their medals were real, but public recognition faded as post-war society pushed women back into traditional roles. Yet within the regiment, bonds were deep and mutual respect strong. They built a rare space where women led, flew, commanded, and proved, undeniably, that they belonged. By the war's end, the Night Witches had flown tens of thousands of sorties and dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs. They tied down German resources, disrupted supply lines, and wore down enemy nerves. 23 of them became heroes of the Soviet Union. Their unit earned the Elite Guards designation, an honor reserved for the most distinguished formations. Their legacy runs deeper than statistics. They proved that, given training and opportunity, women could perform in the harshest combat roles as effectively as men. They turned outdated technology into an asymmetric advantage, showing how creativity can offset material weakness. Their story also warns how quickly societies can forget uncomfortable heroes, especially when they challenge gender norms. For decades, their exploits were little known outside the former Soviet Union. What endures is their combination of skill, resilience, and solidarity. Young women who faced both enemy fire and internal prejudice, and still chose to climb back into those fragile planes night after night. If the story of the Night Witches moved you, don't let it be just another fascinating war tale you forget tomorrow. Their courage, ingenuity, and stubborn refusal to accept limits still matter, especially whenever people are told what they can't do because of who they are. There are countless other hidden histories like this, about women, marginalized groups, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things that rarely make it into mainstream narratives. On this channel, we dig into those overlooked corners of history and bring them to life with the depth they deserve. If you'd like to see more stories like the Night Witches, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you'll know when the next deep dive drops. Drop a comment sharing what surprised you most, or which figure you'd like an entire episode about. And if you know someone who loves World War II or aviation history, share this video with them so the Night Witches won't be forgotten again.